Hello and welcome to the July 3rd edition of Bible Time. Maybe a day off for you, but not for Bible Time. We're powering through. We're looking at the scriptures. We're going through the Believers Fellowship daily Bible reading. And today we come to chapters 16 and 17 of 1 Samuel. First of all, let me thank all of you who a couple of days ago left comments about the man after God's own heart. What that might look like. And those were a lot of good comments. I was really encouraged by reading through all of those. And today we're going to meet the man of whom that was said, the man after God's own heart. We're going to meet David today in these chapters, because in chapter 16 is when Samuel goes to the house of Jesse to anoint the next king. And lo and behold, it turns out to be David, not any of his seven older brothers, but turns out to be David. And then chapter 17 is where David really makes his name for himself through the slaying of Goliath. And we want to look at those very familiar accounts. Let's look at it in chapter 16. Samuel goes to the house of Jesse. God has told him to go there, and God would show him which one of the sons of Jesse would be anointed. And when he saw the oldest son, Samuel thought, yeah, this is the guy. He looks like a king. But the Lord has to correct him. And here's that great statement that's found in verse 7, where the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him." Rejected. Remember, that's kind of a key word here. "For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Well, that is such a common problem. I mean, even Samuel is looking on the outward appearance, but he's told that God looks on the heart. And after 7 brothers go through, and the Lord has said nope to all of them, they have to go out and get David, because he's the youngest and he's got the worst job out there caring for the sheep. And they bring him in, and he's the man. And Samuel anoints him. And then it says in verse 13, Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. So the Spirit comes upon David. And remember, in the Old Testament, when it talks about the Spirit coming upon somebody, at certain people at certain times for certain purposes. And in this case, it's the purpose for him to serve as king. And then it says in verse 14, the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. So the Lord takes the spirit that enabling away from Saul to serve as king, because now it's on David, and Saul is given an evil spirit to torment him as a means of discipline. The Lord allows this demonic spirit to torment Saul as a form of discipline. And when we get to Psalm 51, and David in his great Psalm of confession, it says, "Lord, take not your Holy Spirit from me." This is what he's thinking about. This is what happened to Saul. The Spirit was taken away. This isn't dealing with the issue of salvation. This is dealing with the issue of empowering certain people at certain times to do certain things. And that's what you see here happening with David and Saul. And then chapter 17 talks about a conflict with the Philistines. And the Philistines have this guy named Goliath, who's over 9 feet tall, and he comes out and kind of trash talks the army of Israel and says, "Hey, send out your best guy against me. Whoever wins, that settles it." And Israel's army is hiding behind the bushes there. And then David is sent to see about his older brothers. He brings some supplies to 3 of his older brothers who are actually involved in the conflict. And David winds up going out and fighting against Goliath. Now, this story is so familiar, David versus Goliath. It's turned into like an underdog. It's a football game against a team that doesn't stand a chance against another team, and it's a David and Goliath kind of a matchup. That's not what this story is all about. It's not championing the underdog. That is not what it's about. In fact, if you really understand the matter correctly, all the odds were on David's side, not Goliath's side, no matter how big or how strong Goliath was. And here's the issue. And David sees it clearly. He sees what nobody else sees. He sees what Saul should have seen. But nobody saw it until David shows up. And it says in chapter 17, verse 26, at the end, he says, "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" See, here's the issue. This guy is defying the armies of the living God. Well, God has made promises to Israel, and Israel just needs to trust him and stand against their enemies, which they are not doing. But David sees this clearly, and it keeps coming up. Verse 36, when he's explaining to Saul how he can take down this giant, because he's fought against a bear and a lion when he was protecting the sheep. And he says in verse 36, "Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." That's the issue. Verse 45, David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, and I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you are defying." See, this is the issue. It's the issue of Goliath is defying God, and Israel, God's people, are just standing around and watching him do it. And they're not trusting God and taking down the enemy. Well, that's what David's going to do. Look at verse 46. Here's the key to the whole thing. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth." And here it is, "that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." See, that's the issue right there. David is trusting God. David is believing what God has said. David is willing to stand up to the enemies of God because he knows that God has made promises. And David's not in the army. He's just a little brother bringing some cheese to his big brothers. But he sees what's happening, and he understands that anybody who has faith in God and in his promises can stand up to Goliath. And he does that. And you know the story. He goes down to the brook there in the valley of Elah and gets 5 stones. Gets out there, and with his slingshot and with one shot, he takes down Goliath. And I've been to the valley of Elah. We went there recently on our trip, our Believers Fellowship trip to Israel. I've been there before. And on the first time that I was there, I brought home 4 stones from that creek. I think they're the 4 that David didn't use. I don't know, but see, I have one of them here, and I've written 1 Samuel 17 on this rock as just a reminder of what God has done and what God can do. And you know, when you stand up for God and you act like you really believe in his promises, you can expect that some people are going to try to discourage you. That's exactly what happened with David after his first pronouncement of, who is this guy that's defying the armies of the living God? His brother, big brother, verse 28 of chapter 17 says, "Then why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." His brother's trying to discourage him, saying, who are you? Get out of here. And then King Saul says, "Hey, you're just a youth. Goliath, he's been a warrior since his youth. What kind of a chance do you stand?" You can expect that when you really stand up for God and you want to really live for God, you're going to get discouraged by other people who think you're just kind of over the top, too zealous for the Lord. And that would be a good way to define it. If you're zealous for the Lord, you're too fired up for most people. And it's not going to be any surprise that David and Jonathan demonstrated the same kind of faith in the chapters we looked at yesterday when he went against the Philistines. It's not going to be any surprise that David and Jonathan become good friends because they're like-hearted. I pray that we would have a church of like-hearted people like David and Jonathan, people who are sold out, all in, trusting the Lord. That's what we want to learn from this. That creates the closest, the tightest kind of fellowship. A lot of people just want to concentrate on the fellowship. Now, the closest fellowship comes from those who are the most sold out to the Lord. David and Jonathan are the example of that. And so that's a great lesson for us to learn. That's something for you to think about over this 4th of July weekend. Think about Jonathan and David, who are patriots for the Lord and stood up and led Israel in great victories. Those are the kind of men we need today. I'm praying to that end as we head into this weekend, and I'll see you next week for more Bible time.